you so much. So many people. I have a friend of mine here, Jay Carson. Can you all hear me? I have a friend of mine. We started advertising for this event at 10 o'clock yesterday morning. And we think we have 800 people here. My friend Jay Carson, who is here, who was Hillary's press secretary. He worked on the Dean campaign, he worked on the Bradley campaign, and he said that the crowds that we're getting, that he's never seen crowds like this in August or any other candidate except for Bernie and Obama, who won. So I'm very, very grateful for Yesterday morning, I had breakfast with the economist Jeffrey Sachs, and I was talking to him about my experience at the border. And I said that the entire immigration policy of the United States had been hijacked by the Mexican drug cartels. And he said to me, the entire policy of our government has been hijacked by special interests, by this corrupt collusion of state and corporate power that is now strip mining the American middle class, the working people of this country, the working poor, of their wealth, their equity, and all of it, and along the way, subverting our democracy in 1,000 different ways. And the people who are here are seeing that. You know that it's happening. You see it's happening. The press is not being accurate in the way that they report what's happening, but you know in your hearts that there's something wrong with our country and that there's hope now of winning our country back. I'm going to just tell you something logistically. We're going to have a Q&A after I talk. And then we're going to do something where I'm going to take selfies with every one of you that wants one. We have a method for doing that. So I can't sign autographs. I can't have long conversations with you. But we did the other day in Charleston, we did 600 people in 24 minutes. And we have a method down, and if everybody cooperates, it'll be like when you board an airplane from a crowded lounge. That's about how long it was like. We did an opening of our Manchester headquarters a couple of weeks ago, and there was a big crowd there, much bigger than we expected, but I did photographs with everybody afterward, and the last kid in line was a 22-year-old boy. And he said to me that he had never voted before, never participated in politics, but he was getting involved in this campaign. He wanted to work for me because he wanted to have pride in his country, and he wanted to have hope of having a good future for himself. And that same week, and I was looking at this poll on the way over there, here, a poll came out that showed that in 2013, young people between 18 and 30 years old, 85% of them said that they were extremely proud to be American. At the same poll last week showed that only 18% of American young people said they were proud to be American. So something happened in the last 10 years in two administrations, Trump and Biden administration. Something happened to our country that, to me, has yielded one of the most disheartening data points that I have seen since I began running this campaign. This kid said to me, I don't think I'm going to be able to pay off my student debt. My wife, who many of you know, was 35 years old when she finally paid off her student debt. The only reason she was able to do that is because she got her TV show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. She told me if I hadn't gotten that, I'd still be paying it. This kid is paying double what she paid for college and paying 7 times what I paid for college. And he felt very, very hopeless about his future, and he wants to have a home. He felt that that was part of the American promise, and when I was a kid, it was part of the American dream. It was the promise to every American that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you would have enough money to finance a home, that you could have a summer vacation, that you could raise a family, and that you could put something aside for your retirement. Well, today, and that was working one job. And today that is true for very, very few people in this country. And this kid is looking at a situation right now where the price of homes has gone up from $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 today. And the interest rates of those homes have gone from 2 or 3% to 7%. That home is costing him many, many times what he could have bought it for 2 years ago. And why is it going up? It's going up for one reason, for the reason we have all of this inflation. We've spent $8 trillion on wars, and regime change wars that did nothing for our country, that made it more dangerous to be American, both abroad and at home, over the past 20 years. And the politicians did not have the courage to come to us and ask us for permission to tax us to pay for those wars. So the way that they do it is without taxation, without representation. They tax us in a stealth way at the end through inflation. And that's a tax that falls heaviest on the working poor and the middle class and people with fixed incomes and few assets. But the big reason that kid is not living in a house, I have 7 children, and all of them are at the age when normally at my age, we were starting to look for homes. I don't know any of them that had any of their friends that has purchased a home. And every one of us knows kids who are in their 20s who are living with their parents still. We also know stories of people who are about to put a payment down or about to close on a home. And somebody comes in at the last minute with a cash offer and takes that away from them. And when you look at who is putting that cash offer down, it's some kind of amorphous LLC with an ambiguous name. But if you trace it back to who really owns that LLC, it's very likely it's one of 3 giant corporations: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. These are companies. BlackRock has $10 trillion under management, and they all own each other. So it's really one big enterprise. They own collectively 88% of the S&P 500. And now they've decided that they want to own all the single-family homes in America. That's not a good thing for our country. Thomas Jefferson said American democracy is dependent on widespread ownership of the land, of tens of thousands of young and independent homeowners and landowners who each have a stake in our democracy, who are controlling the land base in our country. And the alternative to that is the old feudal aristocracy, where the land base is controlled by a small kleptocracy of billionaires and giant corporations. And that is the reason we fought the American Revolution, to change that system. But now we're going back to it. Well, these companies have, Larry Fink, who sits on the board of the World Economic Forum, who's the CEO of BlackRock. The World Economic Forum has promised us, in their words, a great reset where we will own nothing but be happy. And part of their plan for making sure we don't own anything is that they're buying up all the houses in this country. So this kid now is competing against BlackRock when he goes out and tries to buy a home. And BlackRock has a much bigger bank book. And so it pays a lot less interest to the home, and he simply can't. These kids, our children, cannot compete against those corporations. They have other issues, other bleak future, which is today in the United States of America, the average income is $5,000 less than the average cost of living. The cost of food, transportation, and housing. $5,000 less. How do Americans handle that? They handle it by putting that $5,000 deficit on their credit cards. Yep. And the bank and the credit card company are charging them 22% interest. If the mafia did that, they'd call it loan sharking and they'd go to prison. But if the bankers, the credit card companies do it, it's just business as usual. And who do you think owns those credit card companies and those banks? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So this is, again, how these giant corporations are coming in and strip mining the wealth, the equity from our children. And 57% of Americans can now, more than half of our country, our fellow citizens, cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. So these are people who, if they see the engine light go on in their car, it is the apocalypse. It's the end of the world for them. Because they know they can't afford the mechanic. They're going to lose their car. They're going to lose the job because they can't get to work. And then their lives are going to spiral into homelessness and out of control. And people are walking around with that fear. Americans are making choices that I never dreamed Americans would have to make. When I was growing up in this country, they're choosing between, this same kid told me that every week he has to make a choice between buying a meal and filling his car up with gas every Tuesday. And now Americans all over our country are making that choice. They're choosing between food and medicine, between food and gasoline. Young couples who are sitting in an apartment with a baby crying on their laps and having to wonder whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. And you all know what it's like, all of us do, to drive around in a car when the fuel gauge is on empty. When that happens to you, you can't think of anything else. It lowers your IQ because you're totally focused on, am I going to make it to the gas station? Now, also, let's heap on that that maybe you have two kids in car seats, toddlers in the back seat. Add that to your anxiety level, and maybe you're driving through a bad neighborhood. And add that to your anxiety level. Well, that is the way that Americans are living every day in this country. I'm running against two presidents who both served one term and essentially are gaslighting the American people by telling them that they produced a wave of prosperity for this country. They are running on that record. But I spent a lot of time sitting at kitchen tables with Americans. And I did this long before I was running because I'm representing clients who've been harmed by large corporations, whether it's Monsanto. I'm representing 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represent people in West Virginia who've been poisoned by a giant zinc smelter down there, and people all over the country were poisoned by PFOAs, particularly in about 10,000 families in eastern Ohio and West Virginia. And I hear the stories and see that what they're experiencing is not prosperity. what they're experiencing is a level of desperation, of fear, of insecurity, of dispossession, of alienation that is atomizing our people, that is fragmenting, that is contributing to this wave of mental illness across the country. I grew up at a time, and I was lucky enough to, that's called the economist and social scientist called the Great Prosperity. It was a 50-year period after World War II when America, the American middle class, became the greatest economic generator in the history of mankind. When my uncle was president, we owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were the greatest exporter in history up until 1971. Everybody wanted our products. When I traveled with my father in Latin America or Europe, people would offer me money for my blue jeans. People wanted American transistor radios. They wanted RCA Victrolas. They wanted our cars were the gold standard automobiles in the world. Everybody wanted them. I remember when I went to, and it wasn't just that we were producing these products that everybody wanted. People genuinely wanted American leadership all over the world. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying. And they wanted our leadership. They believed in the moral authority of our country. I went in 1964, the year after my uncle was killed. I went on a trip to Poland with my father and 3 of my siblings. And at that time, Poland was a communist government, and they did not want us there. We went at the end, my father received an invitation from a human rights organization, and we went there and visited them, and the Polish government blacked out any mention of our presence in the country in all the newspapers, so the public didn't know we were there. And in fact, before we went to Poland, my mother took us shopping in Washington, D.C., the 3 older kids, to buy presents for children in a Warsaw orphanage that we were going to go visit. And we were very happy to bring all these presents to the kids and excited about it. But when we got to that orphanage, the Polish government had removed all the children so that they wouldn't have any contact with our family. 2 days later, we went to Krakow, and we went to visit the Cathedral of Black Maria. And we were going to visit the cardinal, who was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists, he'd been tortured, he had been jailed. His piety, his dignity, his quiet, peaceful presence had inspired a huge religious resurgence in the Catholic Church in Poland. And for us, the Catholic family, it was an enormous thrill to be able to go to meet somebody who was a living saint, who we knew after he died, he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church, which he was. Now, I'll tell you just a little story that's kind of a digression. While we were waiting to see the cardinal, he was sick, and he had to prepare himself for our visit. We were brought into the kitchen by a young priest who was one of his attendants, and that priest spoke very good English. And he made us chicken sandwiches, and then he wanted to talk to us mainly about skiing. He loved skiing, and he wanted to talk about all the American ski areas. He'd never skied in our country. But 40 years later, that priest became Pope John Paul II. And so yeah, the Pope made chicken sandwiches for me. But when we visited the cardinal for 2 hours, and then we were a total of about 4 hours in the sacristy, in the rectory, and in the cathedral. And when we came into the cathedral, Krakow Square, which is this enormous square, it looks like it's a mile long, was completely empty of people. Nobody knew that we were there. But when we came out 4 hours later, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And the word had spread like word of mouth of our presence there, and the entire city had emptied out to come and greet us. They surrounded our car. My father pulled us all up on the roof of the embassy limousine, and he gave a speech, and then for over 2 hours they sang to us so loud. They sang the Polish national anthem, which at that time was a criminal act. You weren't allowed to sing it. And they sang it again and again and again to us. And I saw this electricity in the crowd with tears coming down people's faces and the love they had in the United States of America. I saw the same thing on that trip in Greece, in Italy, in France, in Germany, and Britain. Huge crowds of people coming out because they loved our country. That was good for our national security. It was good for our economy. It was good for the stability of the world. And one of the reasons for that was because our country, particularly in my uncle's administration, had avoided going to war. My uncle said we should never negotiate that year. We should never fear to negotiate, and he understood that diplomacy should lead. That diplomacy should lead, and 3 days before my uncle was inaugurated, and I was at his inauguration, Dwight Eisenhower, was the outgoing president, gave this speech on my birthday, actually, January 17th, 1961, which today, looking back, should be regarded as the most important speech in American history. It was a speech where he warned Americans against the emergence and the domination by a military-industrial complex that would turn us into an imperium abroad and a national security state, a garrison state, a surveillance state at home. And he said that we could not be both a democracy, an imperium abroad, and a democracy at home, which our founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, also recognized. My uncle came into office 3 days later, and 4 months later, he faced down the military-industrial complex during the Bay of Pigs. And he said during the Bay of Pigs, he was lied to by the CIA. He took public blame for it, but to his aides, he said, "I want to take the CIA, shatter it into 1,000 pieces, and scatter it in winds." The next 1,000 days of his administration pitted him in a constant battle against his military brass and his intelligence apparatus to keep the country out of war. He told his best friend, Ben Bradley, one of his two best friends, the editor of the Washington Post, he said, Ben Bradley asked him, "What do you want on your gravestone?" My uncle told him, "He kept the peace. That's what I wanted my epitaph." He said, "The primary job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war." And he succeeded in doing that. He refused to go into Laos. Is Daniel Ellsberg, who was the Rand Corporation and in the Pentagon at that time, said that when he didn't go into Laos, there was a coup d'etat atmosphere in the Pentagon, calling him a traitor to the United States. He refused to go into Berlin in 1961 at the Checkpoint Charlie confrontation. He refused to go into Cuba in 61 and at the Bay of Pigs, 62 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he refused to send combat troops to Vietnam. All of his military advisors, without exception, including people he deeply trusted and loved, Avon Harriman and Maxwell Taylor and Douglas Dillon and many others, all told him, "You've got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government is going to collapse." He said to them, "It's their government. They need to fight. We cannot win their war. We cannot fight their wars for them." He ended up sending 16,000 military advisors, mainly Green Berets. They technically were not allowed to participate in combat. Some of them did anyway, and he learned on October 22nd, 1963, that a Green Beret had been killed in Vietnam. And he asked Paul Rostow, one of his aides, for a casualty list. And Rostow came back and showed him 75 American troops had been killed. And he said, "That's enough, that's too many. That afternoon, he issued National Security Order 263, ordering all U.S. military personnel out of Vietnam by the end of 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December 63, so a month later. 1 month after that, he was murdered. And a week after that, President Johnson remanded National Security Order 263, and within a year, he had sent 265,000 troops to Vietnam. And then, my father ran against that war, ran against the military-industrial complex, was killed in the process. Martin Luther King was killed 2 months before. My uncle, on his own quest for peace, he had become a peace activist, broken with many of the other leaders of the civil rights movement, because he said, we cannot have this war brought in. We have to choose between the war of poverty at home and the war in Vietnam abroad. We cannot do both. And the violence and mayhem we are creating over there is going to come home. And the oppression and the totalitarian features of that war will come home. We have to choose between them. He was killed. My uncle was killed, and my father was killed. And these traumas, my uncle's death, my father's death, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Vietnam War itself, 9/11, and ultimately the COVID crisis. These series of traumas, all of them played this role in pushing us farther and farther down the road that Eisenhower warned us against, the military-industrial complex. And now, over the past 20 years, we spent $8 trillion on useless wars, and we're now in another one in Ukraine that could have easily been avoided, that could have easily been settled. That should have been. My son fought in that war because of his sympathy and admiration for the valor of the Ukrainian people, but it's clear today to many, many increasing number of Americans that we are not there to do a favor for the Ukrainian people. There are 400,000 of their kids have now died, perished in that war, and each one of those kids has a mother. And the United States government is not telling us the truth about it. The Ukrainian government is not telling their people the truth about it. And it's time that we have some leadership, and hopefully at some point the American press will we committed in March $113 billion for that war. The entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. That's what we have for the environment in this country. The entire budget for CDC is $12 billion. We're sending 10 times that to Ukraine. We have a crisis in this country of poverty, of desperation, of environmental degradation. And we don't have money. The same month, in March, that we made that up the commitment to $113 billion, the federal government cut food stamps to 30 million Americans, from $283 to $23, 90% cuts. We told 15 million Americans they were being cut from Medicare. And that same month, the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated to pay for the bailout of the Silicon Valley Bank. So, Mitch McConnell, and now President Biden is back in the Senate asking for another $24 billion, and it's never ended. And Mitch McConnell, when he was asked, do we really have enough money to pay for this war? He said, well, don't worry, the money is not really going to Ukraine. It's going to U.S. military contractors. Oh, we acknowledge it's a money laundering scheme. pay off Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed, and all the other ones. And who do you think owns virtually every one of those companies? BlackRock. Exactly. So this is how they're strip mining our wealth. And I'm just going to tell you one quick anecdote that doesn't affect your lives directly, but I'm campaigning in Iowa, so I've been following this issue out there. They're building a 3,300-mile pipeline. Now, you guys all know that my primary job for 40 years has been in environmental, one of the leading environmental lawyers and activists and stuff. I want to see the environment protected. Carbon capture, which is the primary focus of President Biden's environmental climate program, is a boondoggle. It is a flim-flam. It is actually, it's a way of funneling subsidies to the carbon industry. And here's what's happening. I'm going to tell you very briefly. There's 3,300 miles of 3 giant pipelines that are supposed to pick up CO2 from the ethanol plants in Iowa and then cross 6 states and bury that in deep injection wells where it will remain in the geology forever, which, by the way, does not work. We've seen it again and again fail, and many people get injured because it leaks out. They have to condemn 3,300 miles of farmland, the richest farmland in America. So they're condemning the farmers. The farmers hate it. 80% of the people in Iowa don't want it to happen. 46 counties through which it is running are protesting. There's just a tiny handful of people in Iowa who want it, and they're politicians who've accepted $1.6 million from the primary promoter. And you know what the value of that pipeline is, because the promoters are paid by the gallon for every gallon of carbon that they take, that they transfer. The value is $173 billion, higher than the Ukraine war. And what they're really doing, because North Dakota has now said we will not issue a permit to bury it here. So it's now become clear that it's not an accident that the terminus of the pipeline is the Bakken crude oil field. Because every one of these pipelines that have been built in the past are not used to actually bury the carbon. They're used to do high pressure injection into expired oil wells to get the last oil out of those wells and extend the fields for another 10 or 20 years. No, they're doing the opposite of protecting us from carbon emissions. And virtually all of the politicians in the state who are supporting this are politicians who say they don't believe in climate change. Why are they supporting a $173 billion project that supposedly is supposed to reduce the risk of climate change? Because of the money. And who do you think owns the biggest one of those pipelines? So these are all ways that they're strip mining us. I want to say, I painted a depressing picture for you. I wanted to leave you with some hope. I've spent my entire lifetime fighting these same corporations. I've brought over 500 lawsuits. That are successful lawsuits. The biggest corporations in our country, the Monsanto lawsuit, people told us time and time again, you'll never win that lawsuit. And we ultimately settled it for about $13 billion, and Roundup is now is on the way to it's already being withdrawn from some of the most ubiquitous uses in home gardening, and it will soon be withdrawn from others. But Mobil, all of the big Exxon, all the big corporations, I've litigated against almost all of the regulatory agencies. I know how to unravel corporate capture. And I'm going to tell you one thing that I'm going to do as soon as I get into office. I'm going to, first of all, offer legislation to change the tax code to make it much less profitable for BlackRock and these other entities, large corporations, to buy up millions of single-family homes, because we cannot afford to have them competing against our children. And then I'm going to immediately create a class of mortgages for single-home buyers, first-time buyers, at 3% interest. I'm going to do that without raising the deficit. I'm going to drop this deficit. I'm going to unravel the empire abroad, and I'm going to bring that money home and invest it in America. I start by launching a housing boom in this country. The great prosperity that I talked about was started with a housing boom after World War II that let thousands of millions of returning soldiers buy a home at very, very low interest rates. It got every American to a home. And I'm going to do that by this. You know that if you have a rich uncle and he agrees to co-sign your mortgage, and you can get a much better rate, because the bank is basing that mortgage not on your lousy credit rating, but on your rich uncle's credit rating, which is much lower. So I'm going to give every American a rich uncle. Is called Uncle Sam. He's going to co-sign your mortgage and guarantee it at 3%, which will reduce the average mortgage in this country by $1,000 a month and allow our children to compete against BlackRock. And I'm going to do it without raising the deficit by selling tax-free bonds at 3%, which will be purchased in the marketplace to pay for these mortgages. And the first 500,000 of them we're going to give just to teachers. And in order, because our teachers are abused and neglected, and we need to start giving them something. We need to start recognizing that they are performing the most important job in America. And we're going to give these mortgages to first-time home buyers who agree to live in those communities and to work in those communities, beginning with the teachers. So I want to just leave you with this thought. We have an amazing crowd here. There's no other candidate who's running, with the exception probably of Donald Trump, who is speaking to crowds this size. Hell yeah! My father ran for president. Everybody said he couldn't run, and he in fact didn't believe he could run because he was running against the entire infrastructure, power infrastructure of our country. He was running against a Democratic president of his own party, like I am. He was running against the war machine, like I am. He was opposed by the big city mayors who had supported him in 1960. He was opposed by the labor unions who were all embedded in the DNC. He was opposed by the New York Times, by the Village Voice, by all the liberal media, as am I. But I even have a bigger uphill. And my father ended up winning California, and I believe that he would have won the election. I'm running against perhaps an even larger challenge, because I'm running against the entire infrastructure, including the intelligence agencies, including big agriculture, including the big pharmaceutical companies and the medical cartels. And including the media, who is either aligned with the DNC or largely dependent on pharmaceutical advertising. And they know that day one, I am signing an executive order banning pharmaceutical advertising. They will never support me. They're always going to be aligned against me because I'm going to cost them money. The only thing that I have is this support, is you, is people. I need you to do everything that you can over the next 2 months. To go on our website, contribute if you can, make sure that we have your email. Call your friends, ask them to do it, sign up as volunteers. We already have 160,000 volunteers all over this country. We can do this fast. I need your help, and I need you to get out, and this is our chance to take back our country, all the values that we have. Put the people of the United States back in charge of the United States of America. Thank you all very much.
Bobby, 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 Bobby. Now look, this is what I need everyone to do. I need everyone to go to Kennedy24.com, right? Now, I need y'all to donate to the campaign. If anyone showed me that they donated $3,300 today, I'm gonna let y'all skip the line and get a picture with Bobby. But everyone in this room is stakeholders in this campaign. We need to get this man elected. He is the change that we all want to see. We are America strong. And guess what? Bobby is not only my friend, he's America's friend. And we're going to make sure we get him elected. Let's go! So this is what we're going to do right now. You going to do it, Steph? We're going to do questions, and y'all going to ask Mr. Kennedy some questions. We only have time for like 10. Oh, you can't run it like that. This is Brooklyn, I understand. This is Brooklyn. You can't run it like that.
Stop these entities, government entities, with these internal investigations, where there's blatant facts of malfeasance. I am the second longest wrongful conviction person in the state of New York.
All right, we're gonna bring somebody from the campaign to come speak to you personally. We're going to listen to what you have to say. This campaign is all about listening to the American people, and we're going to make sure we get that done. I guess you guys can come up to the front right here and get 10 people.
Question. Keep your hand up. Okay. Hello.
Well, the gentleman who needed some attention, will you go to the corner there, and we'll send somebody over to talk to you and figure out what we can do for you.
We're gonna, if you have a question, keep your hand up. And if, okay.
Thank you for coming here. You've mentioned an interest in securing our southern borders, is that correct? What are you planning on doing with the migrants that are already here?
The question is, what do we plan to do with the migrants who are already here? We need, before we figure out, the migrants are already here. This is a huge, heartbreaking humanitarian crisis. And because I watched them come over the border, I watched in a 2-hour period 300 people come over the border. Almost none of them were from, only 2 of the families I watched that night between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning were from Latin America. Most of them, about half of them were from Africa. The other half were mainly from Asia, from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tibet, China, India. They did not have I talked to every family, and none of them, only 2 families had asylum claims. The rest of them said, we're here because we want to work. They had been stripped of their wealth by the cartels. They had been exploited, extorted. Some of them had been raped. They had been robbed. They had been beaten. A Peruvian family had their entire life savings robbed. The cartels were advertising on TikTok and YouTube all over the world, telling people that they can get them in for $10,000. The people get to the border, they come across the Border Patrol, who are absolutely disheartened and depressed. 9 of them have committed suicide over the last year, according to what they told us. Bring them to the airport, put them on an airplane, and get them a ticket to any destination in our country. 100,000 have come here to New York City. These are people who have no legal status. They are being exploited by unscrupulous employers. They're being paid $5 or $6 an hour, which is not enough to live in. They're living on our sidewalks, and as most of you know, Eric Adams, the mayor, out of desperation, is putting these now on Randall's Island. We have kids in this city who were deprived of their ability to play sports for 3 years.
Yep.
Some of them would be on sports scholarships.
Yep.
So they had tremendous advantages taken away from them.
Absolutely.
And now they can't play on the sporting fields because they're being occupied by migrants. We cannot solve that problem until we seal the border, because we cannot go back and what we need in this country is a secure border and then wide open gates that allow people to come in legally and have a fast path to citizenship. We need their help. We need their contribution to our society. But we can't do that until we assure the American people that the border is secure and that we are controlling it and not the Mexican drug cartel.
Okay, so the predecessor before always talked about Joe the plumber. I'm Yolanda the podiatrist, and I have to be non-par just to stay alive. And you talked about not being in the pockets of big pharma. What about the big insurance companies? I have to be non-par just so that, not participate in insurance companies, just so that I can stay afloat, so that I can pay my employees, so that I can run the practice, and so that I can give quality health care. And I find that all these politicians are deep in the pockets of these big insurance companies. They have the lobbyists. What are you going to do for the doctors so that the doctors can actually give quality health care and not have factories for practices, so that we can actually provide quality health care? What are you going to do about that?
Well, the insurance companies are part of this giant medical cartel that is driven by corruption, driven by, and I could tell you stories all day about my encounters with the insurance industry and how corrupt they are and how little interested they are in actually making Americans healthier, which shocked me. Because I thought, well, they're an insurance company, the sicker we are, the more they have to pay out. But one of them, the executives, actually explained it to me. He said, because I was talking to him about the chronic disease epidemic and the actual exposures that we can make Americans healthier. The chronic disease is the biggest cause of medicine in the United States. 80% of the $4.3 trillion we spend on medicine is chronic disease. And I thought the one industry that may want to have us be healthier, because pharma loves us sick, but I thought that insurance companies should want us well because it will cost them less. And this insurance executive said to me, he said, if you're Lloyd's of London, Do you think it's a better thing for you if there's one shipwreck a year or if there's 500 shipwrecks a year? And I said, one. And he said, no. It's better for you if there's 500 because then everybody pays more and the pie gets bigger and they're living off the friction of the pie. We have an entire medical cartel and the insurance industry is part of it that are ravaging our population and not providing us the service they're supposed to. And my promise to you is that I'm going to clean up that corruption.
The number one reason for inflation is the Federal Reserve printing more money in thin air. If you're elected, we will abolish the Federal Reserve and put us back in the gold standard so our money actually has value.
I'm not going to abolish the Fed because that cannot be done overnight. And the Fed, you know, my uncle did, which my uncle saw what the Fed was doing, and the impacts. The Fed was originally created as the lender of last resort, which has a value when you run into economic problems. But of course, the Fed originally immediately became captured by the central banks, and now there's a manipulation cycle where they print a lot of money and do what they call quantitative easing, which sucks the American public into borrowing heavily. And they raise the interest rates to 7%, and people lose their equities. And allows the big actors like BlackRock to swoop in and steal all their assets. And Americans are being systematically stripped of assets by the Fed. The Fed and the Fed policies inextricably move wealth upward, and they're creating a society that is now where there's huge wealth above and widespread poverty below. My uncle saw it, and that is a configuration that cannot support democracy over the long term. And that is what the action the Fed does. What we need to do, which I will do, I'm not going to promise to abolish the Fed. I wish I could do that. You can't do that overnight.
It was created overnight.
Yeah, but now the entire world economic system is dependent on it. And is inextricably linked to it. What I'm going to do a couple things. One of the things that my uncle did, which is a few months before his death, he recognized that fiat currency was the currency of war. Fiat currency was created to wage war. And it was shifting wealth upward. And he created the silver certificate and the gold certificate, so that there would be at least some base currency available to the American people that would inject discipline into the market to curtail at least this practice of just printing as much money with no impact. I'm going to issue a series of treasury notes that are rooted in base currency, including Bitcoin, silver, gold, platinum, and other base currencies, at least partially, so that Americans will have an option of buying T-bills and borrowing and of attaining assets that are rooted in base currency, so that they're more of a hedge against inflation. And that will inject discipline into the market. But we need a lot more than that. We need to stop printing money, and that means initially we need to wind down the empire abroad. We have 800 bases abroad. China has 1.5. And each one of those bases is an opportunity for new wars and new spending. And we have an intelligence apparatus and a military apparatus that their function now, as my uncle recognized, is simply to provide the military-industrial complex with a constant pipeline of new wars that we end up paying for.
Two quick points. You mentioned about the real estate prices. I just want to let you know, in Queens and Brooklyn, it's about $570 $25,000. In Nassau County, it's close to $625,000.
Scott, it's okay.
All right, and then the other part is in Suffolk, it's just a little bit less. So when you mentioned about the 3%, that's amazing. If we could do that for folks. And the other quick thing I wanted to tell you is, and I hope this is not out of line, I drove 2.5 hours to meet you tonight and get your autograph. Your mom signed for me in the past, as did Rory, your cousin. So I would be honored if you would be signing this tonight. Thank you.
Hello.
We have a question over here.
Hi again, Mr. Kennedy. It's wonderful to see you again. You were addressing the topic of Ukraine and how that will eventually lead to nuclear war if it continues escalating. Life had changed after the bomb had been dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The dropping of the bomb was targeted against the American population, and we were convinced to authorize a permanent security apparatus. Fear has reigned in the UN since then, with one exception: what your uncle proposed to the USSR in American University. But there's a second speech he gave that gives us a policy for right now, and that's his speech at the UN General Assembly on September 20th. We should offer to Russia and China right now what your uncle offered in 1963. That is the way out of Ukraine, out of Taiwan. India spent about $50 million on their moon mission. So for $1 billion, the Indians could do 20 lunar probes, according to their budget. That's less than 1% of what we gave to Ukraine already. So I would like you to talk about that speech that Kennedy gave when he proposed the US-USSR joint mission to the moon and how we could use that again.
First of all, if I get into office, I'm going to negotiate a settlement immediately to the Ukraine war. I'm going to stop the saber rattling with China. China does want to bury us. They want to dominate the globe. They are our economic adversary. But they don't want a war with us. They don't want a hot war. They want an economic war. And our country now spends $1.3 trillion a year on our military, including veterans benefits and our national security apparatus. The Chinese, and we spend $990 billion just on the military. The Chinese we spend more than the top 10 nations combined. The Chinese spend a third of what we have. They have one base abroad, we have 800. They do not want a war with us. They want an economic competition, and they're winning that right now because we are projecting military power abroad rather than economic power. My uncle wanted to project economic power, and that's why he got his popularity around the world. Over the last 8 years, we spent $8 trillion bombing ports, bridges, schools, hospitals, roads, and houses. During that same period, China spent $8 trillion, the exact same amount, building ports, roads, schools, bridges, and hospitals. And guess what? Because of that, China is now the #1 creditor in virtually every nation in Latin America and almost all the nations in Africa. China is leading BRICS, which BRICS was only created because of the Ukraine war, because we militarized and weaponized our status as the world's reserve currency. And it's not helping us. The worst part of the outcomes of that war are not only that we've made ourselves risking nuclear exchange with a country, Russia, that has 1,000 more nuclear weapons than we do and much better weapons than we do. Weapons that actually can shoot down other weapons, which is very doubtful ours can. We're tangling with the Russians. We have their backs to the wall, and we're toying with Armageddon, but also we've pushed Russia now into a loving embrace with China, which is the worst possible foreign policy outcome that we could imagine. And we've created BRICS, which is competing with the US dollar, and now has 11 nations, controls 47% of the world's population, 30% of GDP, and it's clear that it will now control about 90% of oil production because the major players, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, are all members of BRICS. So we are digging our own grave with the Ukraine war. And we need to get out of that war, and we need to compete with China. My uncle wanted to compete using, economically around the globe. He said, I don't want an African child or a Latin American child when they hear the name United States of America to think of a man with a gun and a military uniform. I want him to think of a Peace Corps volunteer, the Alliance for Progress, USAID, which was then a good organization, and the Kennedy Milk Program. And because of that, today, there are more statues to my uncle, there are more boulevards named after him, more hospitals, universities, avenues and streets in every capital in Africa, Latin America, and any other nation. And that's good for our national security, and it's good for global stability.
Okay, we have one more question. Excuse me.
Medical Freedom Party, we want to know, since you're the candidate against vaccines, will you help the Medical Freedom Party? We also have our...
Okay, excuse me, we have one more question, and then believe it or not, when we're done, we're going to do selfies with anyone that wants one. Okay.
Hello, my name is Renee Mitchell. I'm one of the board of directors for the National Commission for Homeless. I deal with homeless in 50 states. I'm also the executive director of Breaking the Cycle Drop Court, which is my own nonprofit. What I want to ask you, because the homeless shelter is getting $5,000 for each individual, which is profit over human lives, warehousing. The migrants, they get like $10,000 a day. So I want to know, if you become our next president, will you do federal oversight on how this money is being distributed to local cities, states, and governments because the people are not getting the resources?
My answer to that is yes, I will. And I want Stephanie to get your name and address, or Jamel to get your name and address. All right. Well, I'm going to invite you to the White House and you and I are going to talk about it. All right, I want to thank all of you, and I guess where are we going to wind up stuff? All right, we're going to move some of these gates around, and then everybody's going to get a chance to take a picture.
We have a state-based website. If you'd like to learn, if you're a Republican or Independent, want to learn how to change your registration for the Democratic presidential primary, we're going to be doing a group photo right now, if you want to write up.
Because I was the first person censored by the Biden White House. The Biden administration, President Biden took the oath of office on January 21st, 2021. And the White House ordered Twitter to begin censoring me 37 hours later. I was the first name to be censored. And then 3 weeks after that, my Instagram account, which was my major way of talking to the public, was deplatformed and disappeared.
By the way, did you see at the censorship hearing? You got a great line when you said, I'm at a censorship hearing and you're censoring me. I mean, I thought that was pretty funny.
Are we all good? You think we're great?
Yep, you look great.
Okay, awesome. Are you good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Hello, America, and welcome back into the Brian Hollyhan Show. I'm Brian Hollyhan, 17-year-old conservative commentator, founder, editor-in-chief of the Truth Gazette. We're here today in Des Moines at the famous Iowa State Fair. We're like 450 days out from Election Day, and we're speaking to some candidates today. So joining me now is none other than candidate for President of the United States himself, Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr. Mr. Kennedy, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time.
Brian, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got a lot of stuff to go through today. You know, First of all, as we were talking before I came on, I'll be a first-time voter this year. I'll be voting for the first time next November. Almost half of eligible voters in 2024 will be Gen Z or millennials. Why should young voters like myself vote for you as opposed to the rest of this crowded field of candidates?
Well, your generation is dealing, I think, has more challenges probably than any generation in at least a century. Maybe since the American Civil War, because of the changing economic situation in our country. 68% of Americans now believe that they're, for the first time in American history, that their children will be worse off than they were. And your generation is paying 7 times in real dollars for education than my generation paid for. And for the first time in history, it's going to be a hard thing for anybody in your generation to afford a home. And it used to be that in this country, everybody believed, and with good reason, that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could make enough to buy a home, to raise your family, to pay for education for your children, and then to have something set aside for old age. But that's no longer the truth. In fact, just in the last 2 years, the prices of a home have gone from an average of $215,000 to $400,000, but interest rates have climbed by 5 times. So that means today's kids are going to pay 10 times for a home what kids did just 2 years ago. And there was another poll that came out last week that said that when I was a kid, let's say in 1985, so I was born in 54, in 1985, people who were from 18 to 35 years old, 85% of them said that they were proud of the United States of America. Today, only 42% of the people your age feel that way, and that is, to me, one of the most heartbreaking pieces of data that I've seen. So my policies, all of this is happening because of the domination of our country by the military-industrial complex, by this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is strip mining the middle class in our country of its wealth, of its equity, and ultimately is devouring our democracy. And I feel like I'm the only political candidate who has an understanding of how that kind of regulatory capture works at the agency level. And that is my campaign. I'm campaigning on that. I'm campaigning on ending the chronic disease epidemic, which affects your generation. In my generation, 6% of kids had chronic disease. In your generation, it's 54%. Wow. And that means autoimmune diseases, neurodevelopmental diseases, obesity, and allergic diseases. And even if we lost everything, if we became, for example, if we lost the world's reserve currency and we went into a Great Depression, and if you're healthy and you're young, you can always have hope.
Sure.
But if you don't have your health, your capacity to recover from adversity is greatly impeded. And to me, that's the biggest threat to your generation, is this chronic disease. And, all of our children are now swimming around in a soup of toxicity from pesticides, from our food, bad food, from our medications, and many other sources. And we need to identify what is causing chronic disease and to eliminate those exposures.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is the DNC afraid to let you debate Joe Biden?
Well, I don't think Joe Biden would do well in a debate against me, frankly.
I agree.
So I think that the DNC has chosen its candidate, and it's Joe Biden, and they are playing hardball with me to make sure, their decision not to give me Secret Service protection, the first time in American history, and, the first time since 1968, when prior to my father's assassination, the Secret Service was only given to the major candidates. But after his assassination, Congress quickly changed the rule so that every candidate who's running has an opportunity to get it. And both political parties, and you're automatically given it 120 days earlier, I mean before the election day, but it's never been denied historically to a candidate who requested it. My uncle got it 441 days out when he wasn't even a candidate yet. And President Carter, who he was running against, he had a lot of personal antipathy toward each other, and yet President Carter still had the class to provide him protection. I've had 2 members of my family killed, had many, many threats to me and many other members of my family. I regularly get death threats. I had a mentally ill person get up to the 2nd story of my house just 3 weeks ago. We provided the Secret Service with 68 pages of detail about the unique threats to me, and the Secret Service was clearly wanted to give us protection. They told us we'd probably have it within 10 to 14 days, and then they went dark for 88 days. And it had clearly, the decision had gone up to the White House, and it became a political decision rather than an evidence-based decision.
Do you think Joe Biden will be the candidate at the end of the day, or do you think the DNC is going to try to swap him out with a younger, more liberal Democrat like Gavin Newsom?
I believe that I will be the Democratic nominee.
Awesome. What's your reaction to this news that came out yesterday that Biden's DOJ appointed a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden?
You know what? I try to stay away from the court cases and leave them in the hands of the judiciary, because I'm trying to focus my campaign on the values that unite Americans rather than the issues that hold us apart. And those issues are not, they're not issues that are important to people's lives in our country, but they are important. But I don't, there's no profit in me second guessing the judicial process, because it just is an inflammatory issue. So I've just decided not to comment on all those cases against Trump or the Biden family.
Sure, I respect that. An issue that is affecting a lot of people, including myself, is social media censorship. You're suing Google, you're suing YouTube for violating your free speech by removing your videos from their platforms. If elected, what would you do to crack down on these attacks on free speech by social media companies that are acting more like partisan political activists?
The day I get in, I will issue an executive order ordering all federal agencies to cease any communications with the social media sites that are encouraging censorship, and then I will propose to Congress, to amend Section 230 of the Communications Act to make it illegal to remove Section 230 protection against censorship of political speech. So I would leave it in place for other purposes, but not. And Section 230, for people who don't know, is the section that provides immunity from defamation lawsuits to the social media sites. And it's absolutely critical for them to continue to function, because it means that, for example, if you were to do an article about me and publish it on Facebook, and that article was defamatory, people could sue you, but they can't sue Facebook.
Sure.
Whereas if you publish an article in the New York Times that was defamatory, people could sue both you and the New York Times, anybody who was injured. So the New York Times has to vet every story with attorneys and has to have the vetting process to make sure, because it's liable. Well, if you did that with social media would not exist. And in fact, when President Biden was censoring me, I was the first person that the Biden administration censored. We know this because of Judge Doty's decision, and I'm a plaintiff in that lawsuit. And we know that 37 hours after he took the oath of office, the White House was contacting these social media sites asking them to deplatform me. And in fact, Instagram deplatformed me 3 weeks later. I had never published anything that was factually wrong on that site.
Sure.
It was just politically. In fact, they had to make up a new word that was not misinformation or disinformation, but malinformation. Malinformation under the White House rubric was information or statements that, while factually true, were inconvenient toward, White House proclamations and orthodoxies. So, it's just it's political censorship. But the threat that the White House was using to get because the social media sites didn't want to do it. Twitter really pushed back. Facebook at least pushed a little bit back. But so the threat that the White House was using, that if you do not censor our political opponents, we will, and if you do not give a portal to the FBI and CIA to censor our political opponents, and DHS and even the Census Bureau, then we are going to take away your Section 230 immunity. And Mark Zuckerberg said that's existential. Without Section 230 immunity, we do not exist. So they did what they were told.
Good, good. I know we talked a little about security issues and things that have happened in the past with your family. You've also, recently spoken about how you think that the CIA was behind the assassination of your uncle. If elected, what would you do to further investigate your suspicions around your father and uncle's assassination?
I would. First of all, I would comply with the law, which neither President Trump nor President Biden has done.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is to comply with the JFK Assassination Records Act that requires all records of the JFK assassination to be made public by 2017. And the CIA has been allowed to defy that law by 2 presidents in a row, despite both of them promising they would release all of it. That the CIA continues to hold between 4,000 and 5,000 documents that they do not want it made public. And it's clear that, one can speculate, let me put it that way, that since everybody is dead who had to do with at least the JFK assassination, that the reason that for the CIA's unwillingness to release those records has to do with some kind of institutional liability, rather than an individual liability or embarrassment.
Closing out here today, we've talked about Trump. There's been a lot of conservatives, especially some that I've talked about here at the fair today, walked around and did some street interviews and asked Iowa voters, who they would like to see in the White House. A lot of them are Republicans that actually like your ideas. So naturally, there's been calls for Trump to pick you to be his running mate. If Donald Trump picked up the phone right now, asked you to be his vice president, would you say yes?
No.
And why?
Well, first of all, I would be getting a divorce from my wife, and second of all, I think President Trump's governing style is very different than mine. Sure. And it's not a partisan choice. It's just, I wasn't sitting around looking to be, running for president. I ran for specific reasons, and I think I would really want to be holding the reins of power if I got in there to do what I need to do, which a lot of things I need to do are going up against powerful pharmaceutical companies and powerful intelligence agencies, and I'm not sure if President Trump has the appetite to do those.
Sure. I know if you get in the White House, you'll have the appetite to do just that. So, looking forward to watching your campaign further. Mr. Kennedy, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck to you.
Absolutely, really appreciate it.
How about that? All right. I have an introduction of surprise guest. And by the way, I'm Dennis Kucinich, campaign manager. But I'm not the important one here. I want to make an introduction. This is a woman you know and love. You know her from being a great actress, humanitarian. I want to introduce Cheryl Hyde, Biden Kennedy's wife.
everybody. I just wanted to say hello and thank you for being here today. You're going to hear from my beautiful husband in just a moment. We've been traveling all around South Carolina and have had the best time meeting people. Your communities are beautiful. And you have the best sweet tea I've ever had. I think for every meal we have had grits and sweet tea. And I've loved every second of it. So thank you for hosting us. I can't wait for you to hear from, I guess, I want to call you Bobby, but I should call you Robert Kennedy Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert Kennedy Jr.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks to all of you for your patience. Can you hear me in the way back there? Yeah, raise your hand if you can hear me. Can you hear back in the corner there? You cannot hear me. We turned it up. How about now? You can hear me back there now? Great. Well, it was really good meeting you all. While I'm speaking, you might want to look at the picture they took, and if they didn't get your good side, come back afterwards and we'll try it again. I'm very, very happy to be here. As Cheryl said, we've been traveling all over the state of South Carolina. We've found incredible support in the state, and we've eaten a lot of amazing food. We've seen some beautiful, beautiful places. I was, a week ago, we did an opening of our headquarters in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I did, at the end, there was a crowd about almost this size. And I did at the end selfies with everybody. And the last kid who waited in line was a 22-year-old boy who told me that he had never taken part in politics before. This was his first campaign, the first time that he was going to vote. And the reason that he wanted to work for the campaign is that he wanted to feel hope for his own life, and he wanted to feel proud of his country. That same week, a poll came out that showed that in 1985, 85% of the Americans between 18 and 35 years old said that they were proud of the United States of America. The same poll taken last week showed that same group of young people today, only 42% said they are proud of the United States of America. And that was one of the most heartbreaking data points that I've seen, because I grew up privileged to believe that I lived in a country that was blessed by God, and we were an exemplary nation, and that we had a key part in history to play. But this boy is worried primarily about his future. He's worried that he will not be able to pay off his student loans. My wife Cheryl, who came from North Central Florida, worked very hard all her life and never had any money. She didn't pay off. She finally got a job for Curb Your Enthusiasm for her TV show, and at 35 years old, she paid back her student loan. Well, she got very lucky, but this kid is paying 7 times for his college education what I paid. And for that whole generation of kids are going to grow up with that burden on their lives, on their mood, on their feeling of self-worth, and on their prospects in the future. This kid said to me that he doesn't know if he'll ever be able to own a home. The America that I grew up in, everybody understood that was just part of the American promise, part of the American dream, that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, that you would have enough money to buy a home, to pay your mortgage, to support your family, to go on a summer vacation and to put something aside for retirement from one job. Today, I'm running through Americans all over this country who have 2 or 3 jobs between the couple and cannot make ends meet. They sit around the kitchen table and look at their bills, and they do not know how they're going to pay them. And the price of homes has gone up just in the last 2 years, from $215,000 average to $450,000, and the mortgage on those homes is now up to 7%. So this kid is paying about 10 times what he would have paid 3 years ago for a home. And why have they gone up? One of the reasons is inflation. I'm paying for all the wars, the $8 trillion we paid up for wars that we've lost in the last 20 years, useless regime change wars, $16 trillion from the cost of COVID, and another $8 trillion from stock buybacks, which are bankrupting the middle class in this country and shifting wealth upward. The other reason is that there's 3 giant corporations, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which own 88% of the S&P 500, 3 companies. And they've now decided they want to buy all the single-family homes in America. Them and the Chinese. So 10% of new homes are being bought, 10% of that group is being bought by Chinese. The rest of it mainly by those companies. But if we stay on track that we're on right now, 60% of the single-family homes in this country will be owned by corporations by 2030. Now, all of you have heard of stories of kids who cannot buy a home and are moving in with their parents, college-age kids or college graduates. You also hear stories about somebody who's about to buy a home, they have the money for it, they got the homes picked out. Somebody swoops in the last minute with a cash offer and takes that home off the market. Well, those are the companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. I'm running against 2 presidential candidates who both served 1 term in office. And they're both running on the idea that they brought prosperity to our country. And that's why we should re-elect them. But as I go around this country, and I go around all over the country on the campaign, but even before that, I represent people in West Virginia who were poisoned by DuPont, in Ohio who were poisoned by 3M. In Columbiana County, I'm representing 1,000 families whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represent some 40,000 families all over the country who lost or have a family member who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from Monsanto's Roundup. So I end up a lot of my life sitting at kitchen tables with families and understanding what their issues are, and I'm seeing a level of desperation in this country, a level of depression, of mental illness that is attached to the economic anxieties that people have, of alcoholism, of drug addiction, all of these indicia of social deterioration that people are terrified, and it is the kind of desperation that I saw in Latin America when I was a boy, but I never expected to see here in the United States of America. Today, the average income in the United States is $5,000 less than the cost of living, and the cost of basic human needs, of food, of transportation, of shelter. Oh, how are Americans making up for that $5,000? They're putting it on their credit card. Last week, we passed a milestone, $1 trillion in credit card debt in this country, of individual Americans. Nothing like this has ever happened before. $1 trillion.
those companies are charging 22% interest on that credit card debt. If the mafia did that to you, it would be called loan sharking. If the banks do it, and the credit card companies, it's just business as usual. And who do you think owns those banks and the credit card companies? 3 companies: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. These companies are strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and sending it upward to their owners and their shareholders. The CEO of BlackRock is a man named Larry Fink, who sits on the board of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum says that the ideal future is what they call the Great Reset. And the motto of the Great Reset is you will all own nothing and you will be happy. Well, they are on their way to making sure that the first part of that gets fulfilled. Because they're going to own everything if we allow this to continue. And I lived at a time, I grew up at a time, that economists and social scientists and historians call the Great Prosperity. The opposite of the Great Reset was the Great Prosperity. It was a period of time in American world history when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine generator that has ever been seen in human history. Our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And people looked at us not only for our wealth with admiration, but they looked to us for our stature, for our moral authority, for our leadership. Countries all over the world wanted American leadership. They didn't want bullying, and they knew the difference. But they looked at us as a moral icon. And they wanted our products. When I was a kid and traveled to Europe with my dad or Latin America, everybody would come up to the street and say, "Can I buy your blue jeans from you?" They wanted transistor radios from our country. They wanted RCA controllers, and they wanted our automobiles, which were the best automobiles in the world. Everything we made, other people wanted. Now, I went in 1964, a year after my uncle was killed. I went with my father and mother and 3 of my siblings. I have 11 siblings. The 4 oldest of us went to visit Poland. Poland at that time was a communist government, and the government did not want us visiting their country. My father went without invitation and against their advice. But when we went to the country, they didn't want the Polish people to know that we were in Poland, so they blacked out all news of our visit in the newspaper. And in fact, we went one day to visit a orphanage in Warsaw. And it was a very famous, large orphanage. And before we went, we left the United States. We packed up gifts of U.S. products to give to the orphans. But when we got to the orphanage, the government had removed all the children to make sure that we had no contact with the Polish people. 2 days later, we went to Krakow, and we visited the Cardinal of Krakow, who was a living saint. Everybody knew that he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church as soon as he died, and he was, in fact. He had courageously stood up to communism. He had been tortured. He had been jailed. He became an inspiration for the Polish people. He inspired a resurgence of the Catholic faith in Poland. And we sat for a couple of hours waiting to visit him in the cathedral, and then we talked to him. We spent 2 hours talking with him. When we went in that cathedral, the square, the plaza of Krakow, was a giant plaza, was empty. Nobody knew we were there. But when we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us.
They surrounded our car. My father pulled us off up on the roof of the embassy car, and he gave a speech. And for 2 hours, they kept us in that square, singing to us. They lifted the car up. They sang "Sto lat," which means "May you live forever." They sang the Polish national anthem, which was illegal. It was a criminal act to sing that song at that time. And they sang it again and again and again to us. There was an electricity in the crowd like nothing I'd ever seen. There were tears coming down the faces of people, and this passion and love for the United States of America. And on that same trip, we went to Greece, we went to France, we went to Germany and Britain, and we got the same reactions there. People loved our country. And that was good for our national security. It was good for our economy. It was good for our leadership. And one of the reasons for this passion for the United States at that time was my uncle's determination to keep the country out of war. He said that when an African child or a Latin American child hears the term United States of America, he didn't want them to think of a man in military uniform with a gun. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, the Kennedy Mill Program, USAID, which was meant to end run the oligarchs and the military junta and help grow the middle class in those countries, many of which were new countries, former colonial possessions. And he managed to keep our country out of war. He was asked by one of his two best friends, Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post, "What do you want on your gravestone?" And my uncle told him he kept the peace. That's what he wanted as his epithet. He said the primary job of the President of the United States was to keep the country out of war. And he managed to do that during his term. He managed to never send a combat veteran abroad to die. And they wanted him, he was surrounded by military brass, by an intelligence apparatus, and wanted him to go to war. He managed to keep the country out of Laos. He negotiated a deal there with the Soviet Union and the Pentagon. Daniel Ellsberg later said the Pentagon considered that treachery to our country because they wanted to go into that war so bad. He realized very early on during the Bay of Pigs crisis that he was surrounded by a military apparatus and military brass and intelligence apparatus that considered war not only inevitable but advisable. And that we're desperate to get him to go to war. He kept us out of Cuba in 1960, during the Bay of Pigs in 61, and again during the missile crisis in 62. He kept us out of Berlin during the Checkpoint Charlie crisis in 61, and he kept us out of Vietnam. He was surrounded, even his closest advisors, people like General Maxwell Taylor, Averell Harriman, Bob McNamara, people who he really loved, were telling him, you have to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government is going to collapse. And he said, it's not our war. They have to create their own government. They have to fight their own wars. It's not up to the United States to do that. He ended up sending 16,000 military advisors. They were Green Berets. They were not technically allowed to participate in combat, but some of them did that anyway. It was fewer troops, incidentally. And he sent to Oxford, Mississippi, to get one black man, James Meredith, into Ole Miss. And then in October 22nd, 1963, 1 month to the day before he died, he found out that a Green Beret had died in Vietnam, one of those advisors. And he asked his aide, Walt Rostow, for a casualty list. And Walt Rostow came back and told him 75 American soldiers had died in Vietnam. And he said, that's too many. I want them all home.
And that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all 16,000 troops home by the end of 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December of 63, a month later. 30 days after that to the day, he was murdered, and a week after that, President Johnson remanded that order, and within a year, President Johnson sent 250,000 troops over there. Martin Luther King, in 1968, transformed himself into the leading peace activist in this country. Many of his fellow leaders in the civil rights movement said, we should stay in our lane, we shouldn't get involved with the peace movement. And he said, you cannot separate. We cannot have justice and peace at home and be committing violence abroad. If we make ourselves into an imperial nation abroad, we will be an oppressive garrison state, a security state, a surveillance state at home. It's the same thing that Eisenhower warned 3 days before my uncle took office, and I was at his inauguration. The outgoing President Eisenhower made the most important speech in American history. He warned our country against the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would devour and destroy American democracy, that would rob the middle class of its wealth, that would empower an elite, a plutocracy, and that would destroy the institutions of our democracy. And Martin Luther King started speaking about that in April 1968. He was killed. My father campaigned against the war in '68. He entered that presidential race against the president of his own party to stop the war, and 2 months after Dr. King, he was killed. And these series of traumas, my uncle's death, Dr. King's death, Malcolm X's death, my father's death, the Vietnam War itself, 9/11, and then COVID, the lockdown, pushed us down. Those traumas pushed us down that road that President Eisenhower had warned us against. And since 2001, as I said, we have spent $8 trillion on war. If we had taken, and here's what we got for that. Iraq, where most of it was spent, is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We killed 675,000 to 1 million Iraqis. We forced Iraq into a proxy position with Iran, which is exactly what we've been trying to prevent. Iraq is not even a coherent nation anymore. It's a battle between Shia and Sunni death squad. We created ISIS. We had spillover war in Syria. We drove 2 million Syrians into, and other refugees from Libya, another war that we had in Syria, into Europe, and we destabilized every democracy in Europe for the next 2 generations. Brexit is a direct result of our Iraq adventure, and Libya and Yemen and Pakistan, a direct result. The rioting that you see now, the rioting that's going in France, was a direct result of that intervention and that invasion, that migrant invasion. But what could we have done with that $8 trillion if we kept it here? We could have paid off all student debt. We could have kept Social Security alive and solved it for 75 years. We could have paid for child care for every American family that needs to go to work, have daycare for their children. We could have built a high-speed rail system across this country the way that the Chinese did with their money. And we could have done many, many other things that we need, but we spent $8 trillion on useless wars. And now we're in Iraq, or we're in Ukraine doing the same thing. We already committed $113 billion in Ukraine. Now, this is a war that never needed to happen. Russians tried twice to settle this war In fact, Vladimir, the Russians then tried to advance an agreement called the Minsk Accords in 2018 and 2019, which would have, when Donbass voted to leave Ukraine and join Russia, Putin said, I don't want you to. Let's do it. Let's keep Ukraine as one entity, but let's make sure that the people, the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass are protected, that they can speak their own language and practice their own culture, and that NATO will not go into Ukraine. We advanced, we negotiated with Germany, with France, and with the Ukrainian government, the Minsk Accords, which would have done that. It was a very good deal. Vladimir Zelensky won the presidency in 1970, a comedian and actor who ran for president with no political experience and won 70% of the vote because he promised to sign the Minsk Accords. And what happened? Neocons in the Biden White House told him that he could not sign it. They wanted that war with Russia. And we now know, as we recently have learned, that in March of 2022, the Israelis and the Turks negotiated another agreement that did the same thing, and that Zelensky signed the agreement, the initial. The Russians signed it, and they were leaving the Ukraine. They were pulling their troops out. President Biden said, Boris Johnson over there to force Zelensky to tie up that agreement, to tear up that agreement. And since then, we now know we've killed 500,000 Ukrainian kids. My son went over and fought in Ukraine on the side of the Ukrainians. And most of the people that he fought for are now dead. 500,000 mothers who've lost their kids for no reason. Oh, we've committed $113 billion to that war. And we did that in March of this year. Let me tell you something else that happened in March. I have a friend, I've represented commercial fiction in all of my career. I started out on the Hudson, cleaning up the Hudson, suing polluters, protect the fishing industry. And I've represented commercial fiction for 40 years. One of my close friends is a commercial fisherman, and Keith Amato, who's from the Cape, fished out of Wellfleet, Chatham, and Provincetown. And he worked hard all his life. He's now on disability. His son runs the business, but he has no pension. He depends on food stamps. He was getting $283 a month in food stamps. But that money, and the value of those food stamps, because of the inflation of paying for the wars, the value of those food stamps have dropped 38% in 2 years. But the real value has dropped even more because the cost of basic food stuff, chicken, dairy, and egg, has increased by 76% during that period. So his food stamps were 76% less. And even before March, he was telling me that he was having to buy cheaper ingredients in order to get through the grocery store line. Well, on March 1st, he got a robocall from the government saying, your food stamps are now being cut to $23 a month. 90% cut. 30 million Americans got that call. 15 million Americans were told that month that they were being cut from Medicare. That same month, the Fed printed $300 billion extra dollars unanticipated to pay for the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. And President Biden tipped off to Ukraine a contribution for $113 billion. We have plenty of, if we kept that $113 billion here, we wouldn't have to cut one food stamp for Americans, and we wouldn't have had to cut anybody from Medicare. So we made a choice. And the difficulty for me is we always seem to have plenty of money for the bank bailouts and the military-industrial complex. But for poor Americans, for working-class Americans,
for people in need in this country who have worked their whole lives. We don't have that money. And now, but Mitch McConnell, and by the way, President Biden this week is asking Congress for an additional $24 billion for Ukraine, but he's tying it to the Hawaii aid package. So he's holding Hawaiian aid hostage for another $24 billion for Ukraine. Now, when Mitch McConnell was asked, why are we sending all this money over to Ukraine when we have poor people who are suffering in this country, we have a crisis here? He said, well, the money's not actually going to Ukraine. It's really going to U.S. military contractors like Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. We're making all the weapons that we're selling to Ukraine. So it's really just a money laundering scheme to U.S. military contractors. Well, who do you think owns every single one of those military contractors? 3 companies: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So this is how they're stripping our money. I'm going to tell you one other story because I was in Iowa this week, and one of the big issues in Iowa is there's 3 pipelines that are now being built in Iowa, $3,300 miles. These pipelines are not oil or gas pipelines. They're carbon capture pipelines. Now, I've been an environmentalist my whole life, and a lot of you probably don't believe in climate change, and that's fine. I believe in it. I think it's existential. But I also believe that carbon capture is a hoax. It's a boondoggle. It's a way of fooling the public into making us think the government is doing something, but it's really just shifting wealth to the super rich. And it has no benefit for reducing the amount of carbon. Now, these 3 pipelines, they are using eminent domain. These are owned by 3 companies. They're using eminent domain to condemn the land of the farmers, the best farmland in America, the most productive farmland in the world. And they're condemning that land to build these 3 pipelines that are going to pick up a very pure form of CO2 created by ethanol plants. And they're going to bring it up to, they say they're going to do deep well injection and bury that carbon forever. Now, I've seen these projects before, and number 1, they don't work. Number 2, they don't work on either end. The last one they made for Archer Daniel Midland only captured 3% of the carbon from that company. And what do they do? And North Dakota has already told them, you can't do deep well injection in our state. But they're going forward anyway. You know why? Because what they're really going to use that carbon for, they're going to inject it into the exhausted wells, oil wells, at the Bakken crude fields to make those oil wells last another 10 or 20 years. So it is the opposite of reducing carbon. They're actually going to create more carbon. But the value to these 3 companies over a 10-year period through tax credits, which are direct payments from you and me, is $173 billion. But those 3 companies have more than the Ukraine war. $173 billion. You know the biggest of those 3 companies are? BlackRock. Oh, 80% of the people in Iowa oppose that pipe. 46 counties through which that pipe runs have sent protests to the Senate. But the individuals who are making the decision to allow that pipeline to condemn the land and go ahead have received $1.6 million in campaign contributions from the 3 companies that are building those pipes. And all the people who are making those decisions are people who say They do not believe in human-induced climate change. No, it's clear it's just a hoax. It is a transfer it is a way of strip mining wealth from the American public and our equity and shifting it to the richest billionaires on the planet. And that's what we see all around us. And I've spent my lifetime fighting large corporations, fighting these kind of fixed deals, fighting corporate capture. And when I get in the White House, I'm going to unravel this. I'm going to kill this project because I can use FERC to kill it. I'm going to unravel the empire abroad, close a lot of those 800 bases. I'm going to bring that money back here. The billion-dollar stealth bombers that can't fly in the rain. With one of those bombers, we can build 1,000 schools in this country. We can paint the inside of the schools. We can buy computers for the children. We can pay for their education. And that's what I'm going to do as president. And let me just tell you one last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to create a housing boom in this country by doing two things. One is I'm going to use the IRS to make it impossible for large corporations to buy up our single-family homes. Number two, I'm going to create a new 3% mortgage. And the way I'm going to do that, without creating any more debt for our country, I'm going to sell 3% mortgage bonds to financing those bonds. The private investors tax-free. So they'll get a 3%. It will be beneficial for them because they're paying 3% and it's tax-free. But it will finance Americans who want to buy a single-family home. It will only be available to Americans, and we'll start out making them available only to teachers in this country. Because the teachers do that. And the way that we do that is, imagine if you wanted to get a mortgage, and you're a young kid, you can't afford it, and because you don't have a good credit rating, they give you a high rate. But what if you had a rich uncle who will co-sign that mortgage for you? And then you can get a very low rate because he's very rich. And your credit rating doesn't matter, so it'll become available to you. Well, I'm going to make Uncle Sam all of your rich uncles. So that Uncle Sam will guarantee that 3% mortgage. And instead of paying 7% for mortgage, you'll pay 3%. It will take $1,000 off your monthly mortgage fees. And it will make you competitive with BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the Chinese. Because this is only going to be available to American citizens who need who are trying to buy a single family home. And we can do that, as I said, without driving up the debt. We should have done this years and years ago, but as soon as I get into office, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to create a housing boom in this country. The same way that we created a housing boom in 1945, when the troops came home, the GI Bill and these other government incentives made it easy for them to buy homes. And that was the beginning of that 50 years of great prosperity. And it's the beginning of a new era of prosperity in this country, and we're going to rest the decline that we're seeing all over this country. So that's one of the many plans that I have. You can go to the website to read the rest, and I'm very, very grateful to you for your support, for coming out here and sitting patiently. I apologize for all the problems that we have. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. What I would ask, if you have a question, I would ask if you line up right here, and we'll take one at a time. But if you have a question, please come forward. We'll get to as many as we can. Right now, I think we have about 20 25 minutes, Mr. Kennedy. I think that's right. We'll have about 25 minutes for questions. In the meantime, the website is kennedy24.com, or for South Carolina, kennedysc.org. I would like you to go there. Now today, when you leave, make sure you take a sign. If you want to make a contribution to the campaign, you're welcome to do that too. We'd love to have your participation at any level that works for you. We are so grateful to each and every one of you for being here. Now, without further ado, Mr. Kennedy, may we go to the first question? Okay. Please go ahead.
My name is Robert Altman, President Kennedy. I have read your book, Real Anthony Fauci, great book. I appreciate all the lawsuits you have brought in favor of the people for clean air and clean water. I'm wondering, in your administration, will you reorganize EPA and the FDA away from the pharmaceutical industry? Will you stop Roundup from being put on our crops? And will you get a choice, freedom of choice for women on birth or no birth?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question, Mr. Kennedy.
In answer to your last question, I think every abortion is a tragedy, but I think we need to trust women. And I've been fighting for medical freedom and bodily autonomy for all of my life. And I've been probably the lead fighter on those issues, and I think that applies to all of them. I don't think the government has the competence to interfere in our own medical decisions about what happens to our bodies. But I also understand both sides of the abortion argument. I've seen pictures of late-term abortions that are horrifying, and my family is split on the issue. And I don't think anybody would be disrespected for their views on this issue. It's a difficult issue, and it's difficult for all of us, but I believe ultimately the only good choice, or the only choice we have is to trust women. On the issue of, I've sued all of these agencies, EPA, NIH, CDC, FDA, the USDA, the DOD, all of them, and all of them are experiencing agency capture. So all of them are essentially become sock puppets to the industry they're supposed to regulate. Because when you sue an agency like this, you get a PhD in how they work and the corruption. And you're right to bring up Monsanto. When we sued Monsanto, I was part of the trial team for 3 trials. And then, we settled the suits for $13 billion with 40,000, or now about 50,000 plaintiffs. People who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup. A group of discovery documents that we got during those trials were correspondence between the head of the pesticide division at EPA and the top executives of Monsanto. That man's name was Jess Stroman, and he was the head of the pesticide division. What we didn't know, what the public didn't know, was that for at least a decade, he had been privately working for Monsanto, although he was collecting a paycheck from us. And this, unfortunately, is the rule at all of these agencies. There are people who are critically placed in those agencies. I can tell you who they are in many of these agencies. I can tell you exactly who they are in CDC, at NIH, at FDA. People who are supposed to be working for us, but they're secretly working for pharma. And I can tell you who they are at USDA. USDA is an agency that was started to help the small farmer in this country and to produce and to encourage the production of wholesome food. Their actual function is to do the opposite, is to destroy the small farmer, to reward the big packing industry, the consolidation of the retail industry, the consolidation of the seed industry. 95% of our seeds are owned by one company, Monsanto. And so I'm going to unravel that. I'm going to make these agencies do what they're supposed to do. I'm going to go to NIH on week 1 and NIH has a $42 billion budget. It has 56,000 scientists, researchers with funding. And I'm going to say to them, we're going to give infectious disease a little break for about a decade. We're going to start studying chronic disease. We're going to start asking the question, why are our kids the sickest kids in the world? Where did the autism epidemic come from? It went from 10,000 in my generation to 31 in every 34 kids today. Where did food allergies suddenly appear from? Where did all these autoimmune, where did eczema suddenly appear? Where did all these autoimmune diseases, juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, lupus, why did they all suddenly appear in 1989? Why is that the change here? What happened that year? We know that these epidemics are not, we went from having 6% of our kids having chronic disease to about 60%. And no other nation has it. One of the reasons we did so badly in COVID, we have only 4.2% of the population, but we had 16% of the COVID deaths globally. One of the reasons for that is we have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. We have, and CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So they had obesity, they had diabetes, they had asthma, and other diseases. Why do we have them in this country and other countries don't? And we need to, and why isn't NIH research? Well, we know why. We know there's a limited number of culprits, and there's a very famous doctor called Phil Landrigan, who was at Mount Sinai, one of the most important toxicologists in the world, and I used him as an expert in a lot of my lawsuits. And he's asked the question, what happened in 1989? And he said, and he's come down to about 11 different culprits. And one of those is glyphosate from Roundup, which goes along that timeline. Another is neonicotinoid pesticides. Another is atrazine. Another is PFOAs and PFAS, these forever chemicals that around that time were put in all of our kids' pajamas, they're flame retardant, and they were put in all of our furniture. And they're now in our water supply all over our country. We're suing now to get them out. High fructose corn syrup is another culprit. And the vaccine schedule went from 3 vaccines to 72 vaccines, so that's got to be, and 1989 was a big change here. So that's got to be a potential culprit too. Cell phone radiation is a potential culprit, so there's a number of them, but there's a limited number. Landrigan can only come up with about 11. Why don't we know the answer to that question? It's simple science. And they won't do it because they know that the end of each one of those threads is a big shot that nobody wants to cross. So when I get in there, we're going to find out exactly, immediately, what's causing it, and we're going to eliminate those exposures. Today, we spend $1.3 trillion on the military. We were told in 1992, the Soviet Union collapsed. We were told we're going to get a peace dividend. Military expenditures at that point were $660 billion. We were told they were going to go down to $200 billion. That was plenty to protect our country. Instead, they've gone to $1.3 trillion annually. But the biggest expense is chronic disease. We spend $4.3 trillion annually on healthcare in this country, 3 or 4 times per capita what any European country spend, and our healthcare outcomes are worse than anyone's. We have worse health outcomes than Mongolia and Cuba and Costa Rica. Why is that? It's chronic disease. We have more chronic disease than anybody. 80% of our healthcare costs are going to chronic disease. When my uncle was president, only 6% of Americans had chronic disease. And the
percentage that we spend on healthcare of GDP was 1/20th we're spending today, and we are much healthier. What my aim is to get that percentage back to 6%. And everybody, the Democrats and Republicans argue about how do we pay for our healthcare system. Should it be Obamacare? Should it be Medicare for all? Should it be a public option? Should it be the HMO system? How do you pay for it? But all of those, and they tear each other apart, figuring out who's going to pay. But all of those options are just putting a paycheck, sending the bill. Who do you send the bill to? It's like shifting deck chairs around on the Titanic. The real issue is, how can we actually reduce those healthcare costs? The only way to do that, the obvious way, is to reduce the amount of chronic disease that our children have. And that's what I'm going to do as president. If any of you, I'm sure, let's raise your hand if you have somebody in your family who is affected by chronic disease. And you see that. It's at least 50 or 60% of the people in this room. We need to end this. When you are affected by it, the families that are affected, their careers are injured, relationships are injured, their careers are derailed, their earning potential is taken. Their whole focus is on helping that child, in some cases keeping that child alive. And we need to take that burden away from the American people. And we need to figure out what is causing it, and we need to eliminate those exposures.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question, please.
Carlton Barber with In Your Faith Ministries. This is a South Carolina plus a North Carolina question. The Lumbee tribe, Mr. Donald promised to help the Lumbee tribe, largest tribe east of the Mississippi, gain federal recognition. For years we have state benefits, but we are finding that state benefits are not enough. So a lot of Lumbee Native American Indians, as well as South Carolina tribes, are migrating to other states just to be able to do what they need to do to provide for themselves. So the question is, would you be in support of looking at tribes that deserve federal recognition that would help them? And there's casinos being built by tribes in North Carolina. The casinos would also boost the economy.
I spent for about 20 years, I spent 20% of my time, my professional time, representing the tribes in Canada, in the United States, and in Latin America. And my uncle was involved in getting the tribes recertified, and I will fight very, very hard to make sure that those tribes, the tribes that are real tribes, that lost their certification, and they were trying to destroy all the tribes, that we get them that certification back.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question, please.
Jerry Jacobs, Marion County Democratic Party. Mr. Kennedy, I have a very simple question. Me, along with thousands of other disabled veterans, would love to know why does it take the Veteran Administration so many years just to hear a disabled veteran appeal. I know, and we know, veterans have waited almost 10 years to have their appeals heard. Why the process taking so long?
I hear it.
Okay, let's try it again.
That's you.
And a lot of other veterans would love to know why does it take the Veteran Administration so many years to hear a disabled veteran appeal? Why the process taking so long?
Veterans Appeal Process, which of course is a nightmare. Go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
You mean, why does the federal appeal process take so long? Yeah, I wish I did that too, because I'm waiting for so many appeals right now. I have, and also, depending on the circuit, they have different rules and they have different priorities. And some of the circuits don't discipline the judges at all. I'm waiting on appeals I'm waiting on an appeal on my Facebook page.
Excuse me, Mr. Kennedy. I think it's a veteran and he's talking
about what you just said, but also about the fact that the Veterans Administration, am I right? Yeah, the Veterans Administration is so slow in addressing the cases that veterans present. Is that it? Okay.
That is inexcusable, is because they don't have the judges. And I will appoint the judges and make sure that veterans get a hasty adjudication. We're behind on all our judges. I mean, one of the reasons that we have this big problem at the border is because we don't have any asylum judges. So it takes 7 years to get a case in front of asylum, and the people who are petitioning for asylum at the border are letting into the country, and they're given a court date 7 years from now. Oh, and that's inexcusable. I'm going to create this. I'm going to fill those posts. And I'm going to fill the posts of the Veterans Administration to make sure that our veterans would sacrifice for our country and get a hasty adjudication and can get what they're entitled to.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you. Okay, next question, Reverend.
How you doing, Mr. Kennedy? We appreciate you coming down to Florence, South Carolina. Appreciate you taking the time to come and share your view with us. I have a question that I want to ask you. It's just been circulating. And I heard you talk about one-time President Biden, one-time President Trump. My question is, do you feel that President Biden won the election fair and honest? Do you feel that former President Trump lost the election? I want to know your opinion. Do you feel he really lost the election?
In his inaugural address, which I attended as a 7-year-old boy, my uncle John F. Kennedy urged Americans to
ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
On September 11th, I'm asking all of those who support my campaign to do their best to participate in a national day of service. At Team Kennedy, we believe that our campaign shouldn't be just about collecting donations and doing television advertising, but it should be part of a broader purpose to recommit our country to community service. So if you're a supporter of my campaign, I'm asking you to think of some way that you can do something to support your community on 9/11. It could be fixing a school or helping a neighbor or doing an environmental cleanup or beach cleanup or supporting some organization that helps out in your community. It could be distributing sandwiches or soup to needy people or reading to a child. And if you can't think of anything else, at least do some good deed or some kindness for a stranger. We all need to think of ways that we can reorient ourselves and start using our talents to repair the world and to heal the big divisions that are separating us. So once you decide how you're going to serve, or if you want to organize a project in your area, post about it on Kennedy24.com. Your neighbors and other people in your area will see your posting on our website, and they can sign up directly on our website to help. I want to use the momentum of this campaign right now, not some distant future, but right now to begin making a difference in our communities and to begin healing the divide.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
Every nation has a darker side, and the easiest thing for a politician to do is to appeal to our hatred and our anger and our bigotry and greed and xenophobia and all of the alchemies of demagoguery. My father and my uncle had a vision for America, a vision of racial harmony, of prosperity for all Americans, of peace in the world, and of honest government. Their lives were tragically cut short, and America took a different path. Yet the possibility they foresaw is still alive, the America that almost was and yet may be. I've been fighting corporate corruption my entire life, but I understand that today the problem is much larger than a few crooked individuals. The problem is a system that no longer serves the people, and a people who are so divided and so fearful that they are easily ruled. It's time to unlearn the reflexes of fear and blame and find ways to unify ourselves and turn our country around. I won't pretend to you that it will be easy, but I know what it will take. My father said it: love, wisdom, and compassion toward one another. And that's where we need to start. We will scale down the war machine and bring our resources home. We will rebuild our water systems, repair our roads, modernize our railroads, and clean up our environment. We will also clean up government and earn back the people's trust. We will end the secrecy, the censorship, and the surveillance. We will again be a fearless land of liberty.
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it.
We will face honestly the darker parts of our history, the genocide, the racism, not to shame or blame or punish, but to repair as best we can in a spirit of compassion and kindness toward all. I'm inviting all of you to join me to create an America that we can believe in and be proud of again. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm running for President of the United States.